Lucy, we're here to talk about polyamorous relationships. What is a polyamorous relationship?
It's where you're in a relationship, presumably an intimate relationship and therefore a sexual relationship, but it doesn't have to just be about sex, with another person, and therefore there are a minimum of 3 of you in that relationship and all of you have consented to that structure.
So everybody knows what's going on, everybody's fully abreast of the situation.
In an ideal world, and there may even be ground rules that have been drawn up in advance to make sure that everyone is up to speed with how this relationship will be conducted. As I say, some of them are about sexual relationship, but for some it's just about different intimacy, a different sense of sharing, getting a different sense of energy in your relationship. And in fact, there was some amazing research, firstly by YouGov, who've been talking about some celebrities who
there are quite a few of them, aren't there?
The key celebrities that people in the UK in particular are interested in having relationships with are Rita Ora, that probably is not a great surprise to people, Tilda Swinton, who's lived a bohemian life for many decades, and Carol Vorderman, who
Matt's never heard of. So who is Carol Vorderman if you've never heard of her?
I think she used to be a presenter on Countdown. And recently she has spoken about how she has 5 special friends.
Wow.
So, and this is really interesting. So there is
That's a scheduling challenge.
There's well, speak for yourself. I also found some research by Ashley Madison, the married dating website people, and they have identified that quite a lot of people, particularly women, 1 in 4 of their members actually say that they are currently in a non-monogamous relationship.
Although, in fairness, people who are involved who are on Ashley Madison who want affairs.
But only 13% of men. I mean, it's women who are leading this.
Wow.
And I think it speaks to women taking more control of the kind of relationships that they want going forward, and perhaps not feeling completely fulfilled in the relationships that they currently have. Their needs are not being met completely, so they're outsourcing it.
We'll explore that a little bit in a second, but Ruth has been in touch on text. She says polyamorous, there's another derogatory word for that. No wonder STIs are on the up, sexually transmitted infections. I mean, there will be a lot of people who say, hold on a second here.
Well, that's why you have ground rules. That's why you say, what are we going to do about protection? What are we going to do about consent? Are we going to tell our families?
But there will be people who morally say, you should have one partner.
There are some people who may say that, and then there are other people who will say that marriage is a construct that was created in the 13th century to formalise unions so that there were, again, a different set of ground rules. All relationships, to some degree, require a sense of both parties being on the same page. And if you introduce more people to that, and it turns out that 44% of men, perhaps no surprise here, want to be in a quadruple. A quadpole.
A thruple and a quadpole. So what happens in a quadpole?
Well, you have 4 people. And as you alluded to, that maybe there is a diary component to that might make it more tricky.
I had a friend who had a woman who had 4 gentlemen on the go at one stage, and what she found was that she contacted one through text messages, one through Facebook Messenger, one through WhatsApp, and one through some other messaging service, and said that was the way to kind of keep it sort of organised.
But I suppose that's not quite the same, because that sounds like they didn't know about the other. Exactly.
No,
so polyamory is very much around everybody being aware of what the structure is and being consenting around it.
I mean, you're a psychotherapist. You're someone who has views on this, and you've talked to many people over many hours about relationships. Do you think it can work? Do you think it's the right solution for people, or is it actually just something that can store up problems?
There are definitely problems that can happen, but you could say the same about a monogamous relationship. The key is about consent and about checking in on those ground rules all the time. And in a way, you would do that in your monogamous relationship. My worry is that it does fuel jealousy and perhaps sense of inadequacy, which again is why you need to have big, deep conversations about it.
I have one friend, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lucy, but I have one friend I'm just thinking about here who got married and said to her, she's quite a bit younger than me, she got married and said to her husband, we are going to have an open relationship, which is slightly different from this, and I'm going to go off and have sex with other people. And the husband said, yeah, that's fine, no problem. And then it actually led to the end of the marriage, because she was happy to do that. He was, in theory, able to do that, but chose not to do that. And actually what people perhaps sign up for is maybe something that they're not entirely happy with
Yes, so
in the longer term.
Funnily enough, there was another piece of research by Ashley Madison about 3 or 4 months ago, which talked about contracts, couples contracts, which is this way in which you actually identify what the rules will be. And as you say, you could intellectually say, I'm going to sign up for something, but once you're in it, there's a movie that's just come out called Passages, which I saw yesterday, which again is about a threesome that know about the other, but not everyone is on the same page, and not everyone is in the same emotional investment as everybody else. And that's where it's going to go wrong. If you're not on the same page, if you haven't got the same emotional investment or the emotional agenda, one might say, then it will start to unravel. I can't really judge and say whether it's morally questionable or not. I think if it works for you, and for some people, and I think in terms of relationship fluidity, it is working for an increasing number of people, as this research from Ashley Madison and YouGov both identify. But if it's not your bag, then you have to be open enough to be able to say, I don't want that. And therefore, what are the implications for our relationship if I'm that honest?
I must say, the older I get, the less I judge people about these kind of things. I know people who've had affairs. I know people who have weird and wonderful relationships. I know lots of people with lots of different sexualities. I mean, I don't really care. I mean, if people are happy and they're not damaging other people and everything's consensual, well, that's okay. And I suppose I'm pretty socially liberal in that regard. I just wonder if this can actually work. And you're saying, it can work, but we've seen some of those celebrities, haven't we? I think David Hay was the one I was thinking of, where people sort of say, well, if it's 3 people, for example, there's 1 man and 2 women. I mean, that can't really be 3 equal people. If you have a
but it depends what you're bringing to that relationship, because as I said, it might not necessarily just be about sex, or it might not necessarily just be about intimacy or friendship. What it is giving is very different energy, and you might find that your primary relationship, if you can call it that, will benefit from it because you're not disappointed that the other person isn't meeting all your needs, because there is someone else who's meeting some other of those needs. And if that as a triangle works for all 3 parties, then that's got to be a really good thing.
It's really interesting you mention that, because I think, I mean, I'm sure there will be people who agree with you and there will be people who disagree with you in this as well. It's fascinating that, I mean, you're someone who I've interviewed a number of times, and I know that you have an open mind in regard to this. What would you say to people who actually are hearing this perhaps for the first time, or watching this for the first time, and thinking, actually, do you know what, that's just too out there, it's just something that doesn't actually relate to my life at all. I'm married to the same person I've been married for a long time. It wouldn't enter my head or their head to ever involve ourselves in this kind of thing. What would you say to those people who wouldn't necessarily want to take part in this kind of relationship, but actually it's new to them?
If it's new to them, but they are very happy and fulfilled in their existing relationship, then I'm cheering them on, because that's all I ever really want for people, is that they have fulfilling relationships. What I do observe is that there are some people who, an increasing number of people I see, stay in unhappy or miserable relationships because they don't realise they have permission to do something else. And I completely appreciate that there may be children involved, there may be a mortgage involved, there may be an awful lot of guilt around different behaviours. But if you're miserable, you only have one life, is all I would say. And that actually, if there are ways in which you could explore opportunities, if somebody is listening or watching you today and is thinking to themselves, maybe I could have a conversation with my partner about this. I was listening to Peter Cardwell and he was talking about this. At least have the conversation, because you never know what may come back at you. Is someone saying, you know what, I've been thinking the same thing too. And do you want to lie on a deathbed?
But alternatively,
say,
the person could say, but Lucy, alternatively, the person could say that's a horrible thing, and I actually feel devalued by you even suggesting it.
Yes, and my argument, my comment to that would be to say that those kinds of conversations happen in monogamous relationships in any way. That actually you can find that there are ways in which you no longer meet if you've been together 20 or 30 or 40 years, that actually you do grow and you do change. And the best relationships are where you can put everything out there and discuss it with no judgment, with no fear that there will be, hostility or repercussions, but to actually just put your heart out there and say, but this is something I'd like to talk about, or this is something that makes me uncomfortable. There's got to be permission for both sides.
Terry is in Dover and has given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Terry, you're very welcome to Talk TV. What do you make of this?
Oh, good afternoon, Peter. I tuned in rather late to your programme today. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. You can always look back on talk.tv on the app or indeed on YouTube. But what point would you like to make on polyamory?
Yeah. I mean, I thought I tuned into a soft porn channel at first. But no, that's a serious point. Can people not just have friends? Rather than indulging in sexual relationships all over the place. I know it's consensual and it's subjective. And ostensibly you're not harming anybody, but cannot people just have one person relationship and grow within that relationship?
Well, let's put that to Lucy Beresford.
And Terry, thanks so much for calling in, because I think you're right. I think that is a possible model for a lot of people, that they meet someone and
probably the majority of people. Let's face it.
The majority, but you could argue that that's the model that's been sold to us. If you're read, Cinderella and Prince Charming and Sleeping Beauty from a very early age, that's the model that you assume works. And what we're observing nowadays is that people want to be more fluid. If you're going to live to 120 and you meet someone when you're 24, can you actually envisage being with them for 90 years?
Well, what do you make of that, Terry? Terry, are you still there?
To answer that specific point, the oldest person ever lived was 122. But an extreme example. No, I couldn't. No, I couldn't really. No.
Are you? What sort of relationship are you in, if any, Terry?
I'm single, and I've been single for most of my life. I feel a bit claustrophobic in relationships. I'm an only child. I read a lot. So, that's me.
But Terry, that's the beautiful thing. That is what works for you. And my observation is that for quite a lot of people, and increasingly women are driving this, as the Ashley Madison research showed, that actually if you have an opportunity to live a life on your terms and to have fulfillment in the way that you want, which is what is happening for you, Terry, as well, I would want that for people. I want people to have the life that works for them.
Does your life work for you, Terry? Are you fulfilled?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. As I say, I do read a lot. I've got a lot of interest that way. But as I said at the outset, it is sort of highly subjective, isn't it? I mean, there's no sort of measure of objectivity you can bring to this. It's what works.
What works for you within the relationship, and that's why I always feel that couples need to keep up the level of communication, so that even if you do end up in a polyamorous relationship and there are 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 of you, that actually the communication is consistent, that it doesn't get outsourced. So what I have seen in certain polyamorous relationships is that some conversations take place between couple A and person A and person B, and then a different type of conversation between person A and person C, and that's what starts to fragment the relationship. That if you can be there in a way, as Terry says, to have the life that works for you.
Terry, thanks for your call. I appreciate that, and thanks for being so honest as well. These kind of issues are perhaps not the easiest thing to talk about. That was Terry in Dover there. Christina in the West Midlands has been in touch as well. He says, celebrities break all moral ground, and my concern is that the moral norm is going to be thrown out the window as society's upside-down behaviour continues. Celebrities set examples, and poor examples like polyamory is concerning for a model way of behaviour. It's not acceptable and should not get airtime, says Christina. What do you think, Lucy?
Well, I'm really glad that it has got airtime, so that people can start to think whether the existing model works for them. And I think we have to be careful about pointing the finger at celebrities, because my observation, certainly within my clinical work, is that this is happening to ordinary people. They're making choices around the fact that their relationship doesn't work for them, and they're looking for something, or maybe the whole model of monogamy is no longer working for them. And I have to say that it is being driven by a younger generation, people who are younger than me, who are saying, this doesn't work for me anymore. I'm not finding the right people, and I'm not meeting people who meet my needs. And I think it's that idea of when people were in relationships and they were settling because they felt that they had no alternative. Now people are making different choices about their lives going forward. It's about saying, if this relationship isn't working for me, I'm going to do something about it.
Vivian in Warwickshire says, Peter, what weird friends you have. It's repulsive. What a weird world we live in. The older I get, the more judgmental I get. Well, Vivian, I would, I mean, that's fair enough opinion. I would probably refer you to the words of Billy Connolly when he said, to understand someone, walk a mile in their shoes. And if you still don't understand them, who cares? You got the shoes. Lucy, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts there. Lucy Beresford is a psychotherapist. Fascinating discussion.